Between now and December 31st, My Essential Birth is $100 off, and I want to make sure you hear this. If you're preparing for birth and want to feel calm, confident, and in control, even if things don't go exactly as planned, this is for you. My Essential Birth has helped thousands of mamas go from feeling unsure to walking into birth, knowing what to expect, and how to advocate for themselves. Right now, when you join for just $197, normally $297, you'll also receive birth affirmation cards as a bonus. These aren't just feel-good words, they help you train your mind during pregnancy so that fear doesn't take over when labor gets intense and your body can do what it's designed to do. This offer ends December 31st, so head to myessentialbirth.com/get started and start preparing with confidence today.
I felt that ring of fire right after the water broke. I was like, oh my gosh, I am stretching so far. Like, this is way more than I thought it would be. I was on an epidural at that point. So I had never felt that before. So I was like, whoa, this is crazy. I am stretching so far and the baby is like coming out. I can feel her coming out. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like all that whole time I've been saying like, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. And at that point, I'm like, no, I can't do this. And Braden and the nurses and the midwife were all like, no, you're doing it. You're doing it. And my favorite phrase that I remember really distinctly was the nurse. You know, she came right up to me in my face and she said, you are doing it. That's what your contractions are doing. You're pushing the baby out right now. So I kept pushing and finally the baby came out and it was, you know, just the most amazing, relieving feeling. I like to compare it to hiking a mountain. I grew up in Colorado, so climbed up a 14er one time. That's a mountain that's higher than 14,000 feet. And just that sense of accomplishment was just, you know, it's like, I'm on top of a mountain. I did it. And it was kind of that same feeling with birthing the baby. Like, that was so hard. I did it. That was so great. I'm glad it's over, but I did it.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. Welcome back to the Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy podcast. I have with me Rebekah, and she is a My Essential Birth mama here today to tell her birth story. And this is her second My Essential Birth story that she's here for. So thank you for being back here again. And with that, and so everyone can get to know you really quick, will you kind of introduce yourself, talk about you and your family, and then we'll kind of dive into all things pregnancy and birth.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Rebekah Foderaro. I've got two adorable little kiddos, one who was just born this year and one who's turning 3 in January. My husband just graduated from UNM with a nuclear engineering degree. So we're actually going to be moving pretty soon. So we live in Albuquerque right now, and we're going to be moving up to Los Alamos, New Mexico in about a month. So we're pretty excited about that. I'm very crafty. I like to do things with my hands, artwork, crocheting, stuff like that. I run a small Etsy shop just for fun when I'm not busy with my kids. So
that's so fun. Yeah, I love it. I'm so glad you're here. And we're going to kind of dive into both pregnancies. I want to hear about the most recent one because we've already covered the other one. But I know that when we are talking about a second pregnancy, some of that stuff gets pulled from our first pregnancy or birth. And so I want to kind of hear that. First of all, I'm curious, how far apart are your babies? So like how old was your first when you got pregnant with your second?
Yeah, so my first, like I said, he's turning 3 soon. So he was about 1.5-ish, almost 1.5 when I got pregnant with my second. I remember it was during the summer, so he was probably a little bit before 1.5, but we were planning on having her pretty soon. So It was really exciting to go like, oh, you're going to have a little sister, and we wanted them to be close because like we both grew up in families where we were kind of close with our siblings and we just loved that connection. So.
Oh, I love that so much. Okay, so let's talk about this pregnancy. Tell me a little about this pregnancy, how it was different or the same as your first, and if there was any kind of funky things or if it was pretty textbook.
Yeah, so with my first pregnancy, the morning sickness wasn't too bad. But with this one, it was completely the opposite. Like I was, super sick all of my first trimester, just kind of hating life. I'm like, this is awful. Why did I do this again? But other than that, it was pretty normal. I did get diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which I learned a little bit about. Turns out it's not as big of a deal as my original provider made it sound like. So I actually did give birth at the birth center, and the midwives there were like, "Oh, you're fine. You just have to take medicine, and we'll, check your blood levels every few weeks, and you'll be all right." So that was the only medical complication I really had. Everything else was pretty normal.
Ah, that's neat. So do you have a boy and a girl or a boy and a boy?
Yeah. So my first is a boy and my second is a girl.
Okay. I was just wondering because I know some people say like, oh, I was so nauseous with one gender and then I wasn't nauseous with the other. So now you're going to have another baby so that we can figure out.
Yeah. I had heard that before. And actually, before we knew that I was going to have a girl for the second, I was like, maybe this is a girl because I am so sick
oh, that's
with this one. And it turned out to be a girl. So I guess we'll see with the next one if that's the case.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's kind of fun. I like that. Okay, so you kind of talked about switching providers. So were you in the same area? You're talking about moving now, but were you in the same area? Did you start out with the same provider for this baby? And what was that, a midwife or an OB? It sounds like you were headed for a hospital. Can you talk about kind of your provider situation?
Yeah, so actually I had my first when I was up in Idaho in Rexburg. I was, finishing up school up there with my husband, our bachelor's degrees. And we moved down here before I got pregnant with my second. So we were kind of in a different state. It was like a new situation. I didn't know anything about the doctors around here. So I went on this mom's Facebook group thing for Albuquerque. And I said, hey, what are your recommendations? Like with my first, I had, I did a midwife birth in a hospital. I guess technically I did have an OB at the end there because we did a vacuum extraction. But for the most part, I did midwife care in a hospital with my first. So I was kind of looking for the same thing for my second and got some recommendations for this place. I went there and after the first meeting, I was like, this is not going to work. They were pretty judgmental. They were like, oh yeah, you are like barely overweight in the BMI. So you are high risk pregnancy. And I'm like, you didn't ask me anything about like my diet, my exercise. Like I know that I'm healthy. I do my best to, eat well and I get out and move around all the time. They didn't ask me any of that. I'm like, yeah, this is not going to work. So I started asking some of my friends at church. I was like, hey, where are you going? Because I know that you're pregnant. Where are you going for your care? And this one girl said, oh, yeah, I'm going to this birth center. They're like, up probably about 30 minutes away, farther than the other place was. So it's a bit of a drive, but they're super cool and I love it there and you should totally look into it. And I was like, okay, I'll look into it. We weren't super excited about birthing outside of a hospital because my husband is, just a little bit nervous about that sort of thing. But we said, well, we'll look into it. We'll see what we think. And we got there and it just immediately felt like home and the providers were so awesome and they were, very considerate and total opposite of the provider that I had before. So I'm very grateful that I switched.
Yeah, good for you for doing that. Did you have, with your first, did you do any kind of switching or double checking, like checking with other providers, or what was that like?
Yeah, with my first, I stayed with the same place, like the same medical area. I started with an OBGYN because I was like, oh, this is my first.
Yeah.
And then he said some things and I'm like, actually, I'd like to try a midwife. And he said, oh, we have midwives here. So I just went with the midwife at the same place.
Oh,
so, cool. And, it as it turned out, I met that OBGYN again because, like I mentioned before, my first was a vacuum extraction and he came in later, but it was still great to work with a midwife at the same place with my first. So,
Yeah. So do you think because this was your second, because you were like, you had mentioned, oh, because it was my first, I just figured I'd go with an OB. Do you think it's because you had been around the block once that you're like, I'm going to do this the way that I want to do this? Or what do you think kind of made that
yeah,
decision?
I think that really helped. My husband, his mom had all C-sections. So he was kind of the attitude of you go to the hospital to have your baby and
Right.
you get an epidural, or you get a C-section, and that's just how it's done. And my family is a little bit more crunchy, I guess. My mom likes essential oils and stuff. My grandma had most of her babies at home. So we had to kind of meet in the middle there a little bit. So with the first, we were like, yeah, it's probably best if we have the baby in the hospital just in case there are complications because we don't know what to expect. But with the second one, it was kind of a different narrative because we were like, well, we do know what to expect, we know how I do with birth, and I'm low risk and it went okay last time. So we'll try the birth center and see how that goes. So yeah, we were much more open to it the second time around.
I love that you're sharing the contrast too, because I think moms need to hear that. It is so scary sometimes just to make the call to see somebody else. It's like you feel like you're cheating on your provider or something, or, like you just feel like icky inside because like, no, I have somebody, I shouldn't be doing this on the side. But then you go and like you had said, like just total opposite and you felt so comfortable. How was that for your husband as well? Since he sounds like he was more comfortable with the medical side of things. What did he think about that?
Well, since he was our second, he didn't actually come with me to my first appointment with that other provider. So he didn't know about my experience. All he knows is that I came home and I was crying.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't like that. And he said, okay, we can look somewhere else. So he had come with me to tour the birth center, and then he wasn't able to make it to a lot of the appointments because he was in his master's program at the time. So he was really busy with classes, but he did come to a few appointments and he would ask them questions like, hey, what's your plan for this? And they had like required classes about like, in case you need to transfer to a hospital. And he's like, oh, I like these people. They're sharp. They know what they're doing. They're not going to keep you here if things get dangerous. So that really helped him a lot. Was that they had like a hospital interventions class and they had this whole plan for if things go wrong. And they're like, we may be a birth center, but we are medical professionals and we know what we're looking for and we know what signs to look for. And that helped ease his mind quite a bit.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm glad you said that because I think other families need to hear that as well. And I think having the dad be able to tour the center and things with you makes a huge difference. Definitely puts him at ease. So that's really neat. Okay, let's talk about your birth partner, actually. So master's program, you have a toddler. How was he able to support you, even though it sounds like life was really crazy, which just is the case when you were young and having babies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we were really busy. With the first, I felt like he was able to get more into it. He was able to do the class with me. He had more time to set aside to help me with like practicing for labor and stuff. With the second, he just had to take care of his master stuff and he did his best to be there for me and to be there for my son as well. And he helped me out as much as he could when he came home, but he was gone a lot during the day. So a lot of the preparation for me was kind of a little bit more alone for my second, but I was more comfortable with it because it was my second. And he knew what to expect because it was his second as well. So, we still talked a lot. And when it came to labor, he dropped everything and he was there for me, from start to finish. And his boss and his teachers all knew what was coming. So they weren't surprised at all when he had to cancel all of his classes and stuff. So he was prepared in that sense. He wasn't able to be there as present for the second as he was with the first, but we were both okay with that. We knew what to expect because, we just knew it was coming and we were like, well, it's all right because we've been through this before. So we're all right with it.
I love that confidence of a second time mom. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about your preparation. Because again, and maybe how that was different, first baby versus second baby. Because I know once you have a toddler, right? It gets a little
Mhm.
crazy trying to do all the things that you had so much time for before. But let's talk about your preparation.
Okay, yeah. So I'm a firm believer in education and the difference that education makes. Um, I when I was taking my bachelor's degree, all of the electives I took were about child development and especially newborn and toddler development because I knew that that would be coming up for me soon. So when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, well, I've got to find the best way to learn about this. So I looked into a couple of classes and I found the My Essential Birth course and started doing that and learning everything that I could about it. And that was most of what I did for preparation. For first, I did a lot more of this stuff like not medication, meditation, the exercises, the dates and everything. With my second, I didn't have as much time because I did have a toddler. He did keep me moving. We have a park that's about a mile away, and he kept me going to the park every day. So we had to keep doing that because otherwise there would be a tantrum
Hmm.
on our hands. So I did a lot of moving in preparing for the second labor. I also, uh, I had already taken the birth course, so I didn't actually take it again. But I listened to all the podcasts. I reread my notes on it. Like I mentioned, the birth center that we use, they required us to take classes for that. So we did. We took a couple of classes there as well. I wasn't quite as diligent with the 3 exercises. I wish I had been. But I did keep up with drinking raspberry leaf tea in the third trimester. Again, partly because my toddler, he really likes tea. So he saw me drinking tea and he's like, I want tea. So I'd let him have a little sip of mine or I'd make him some peppermint tea or something, you know. So we kind of had tea together and it was a cute bonding moment. So yeah, I think that's all that we did to prepare. We did do essential oils and music and like a labor rehearsal with my first. And with the second, we didn't do the labor rehearsal because we had a little less time, but we did do music and essential oils and all that stuff to practice kind of getting in the vibe.
Do you feel like there was any mental preparation the second time that maybe you didn't think about or prepare for the first, or how was that different for you since you had some experience going in and because you were going from hospital to birth center? I'd love to hear kind of what happened in your mind and how you did that positively towards, having a baby at a birth center.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I was a lot more confident with my second. So I did have with my first I wrote up all of these little phrases like you can do this, you are so strong, God is with you. And I just kind of kept those and read over them again while I was preparing for my second. I didn't actually bring them to the birth center because I forgot, but I had them all kind of in my mind. Along with that, I knew what to expect as far as like pain management and centering myself. So anytime I was like, having a rough time, whether it was emotionally or like even if I like stubbed my toe or something, I would work on breathing through it. And that helped a lot, not only with preparing me for labor, but also with handling my toddler. Sometimes when he was being unreasonable, I figured out how to breathe through these things and reason through them mentally. So I didn't do a whole lot formally, but I did a lot informally. Just whenever I thought about it, I would think, I would kind of do that mental preparation. So
That's one thing. I'm glad you share that because that's one thing that I think we as moms, it's so like in the forefront of our mind at all times because we are pregnant, because we are feeling the baby at all times. So I love even like I stubbed my toe and it was probably like deep breathing and how can I relax and work through the pain. But I think those tiny things that we do all throughout our pregnancy absolutely translate into labor. So you're right to the first time around. And when you don't have any idea kind of what to expect, then I think you do need a lot more of the do it this way and breathe like this, and let's practice the labor rehearsals and all of that, which can absolutely be beneficial at any time, any pregnancy. But if you've done it before, like it really is like, I know what I need to do mentally to get over this hurdle and to relax through this. And so using all those everyday things, I think that's the best preparation you can do. That's so solid. So it makes perfect sense without anybody having to tell you to do that, that's what we do as women to prepare for that next labor. So that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How about anything you did to prepare your body for labor? And before we get into that, you mentioned that you had some hypothyroidism and they did medication for that. Was there anything else that came up throughout your pregnancy? And then two, when you were getting closer to birth, did you choose to have vaginal exams? When was your last appointment before you went into labor? Did you know your dilation and all of that kind of stuff? Those are my curious questions before we dive into the birth. Quick pause because this matters. So many mamas tell me they want to be well prepared, feel in control, and trust their body when birth day comes. That's exactly why My Essential Birth focuses on both knowledge and mindset. Right now through December 31st, you can join for just $197. That's $100 off. And you'll receive birth affirmation cards to support your mindset daily. When you practice calming, empowering thoughts during pregnancy, you're teaching your nervous system how to stay grounded when things get intense, instead of panicking or freezing. Thousands of women have used this approach to walk into birth feeling prepared, confident, and supported. If you've been thinking about joining, now's the time. Visit myessentialbirth.com/get started, all one word, before this ends.
Right. So as far as hypothyroidism goes, I don't think there was really anything that came up with that. They just kept checking my blood every few weeks and making sure that my thyroid levels were okay. They were like checking all the hormones there, and I kept taking the medicine that they gave me, and everything was fine there. As far as like checking vaginal exams and stuff, I've never really been against that. I know that a lot of women don't like the vaginal exams, but I kind of like to know where I'm at. I know that it's not like the most accurate way to tell, but I just like to know that. So with my second with Carrie, my last appointment before I actually went into labor, they did check me vaginally because I've been having contractions. And let's see, I can't remember. I think I wrote down notes here. I think, yeah, I was at 3 centimeters when they checked me. I had like felt a little trickle earlier that day, and they were like checking me for amniotic fluids. And they're like, "You want us to just check your cervix while we're down here?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I was at 3 centimeters. I'm like, "Awesome, this is great." I had predermal labor with my first, and that was really rough. So it was a lot less of that with my second. I opened up a lot easier, but yeah, I wasn't really against the whole vaginal exam, so they did that from the start.
Okay, with that, let's go ahead and dive into the birth. So tell me everything from that first contraction all the way through.
So, like I mentioned before, I felt kind of a little trickle at the start. It was March 19th. So this was the day before she was born. I was standing in line at Joann's getting fabric, and I felt a little trickle, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, my water broke." And I went home and I put the toddler down for a nap, and I put a pad on and everything, and I laid down for a bit, and then I got up and there was no more trickle. I'm like, dang it. I may not actually be in labor. So I had a midwife appointment that day. So we went to the appointment. They checked me. I was at 3 centimeters. They tried to test me for amniotic fluid because they said they definitely felt fluid coming out there, but the results were inconclusive. So they were like, "Well, we can do some deeper tests, but it's going to take a little while." So they asked if I wanted to do a membrane sweep, and I felt like this was the time, so I said sure. So they did a membrane sweep. Then they put me on a non-stress test for a little bit. Baby passed with flying colors. I wasn't really contracting super consistently, but they were like, "Well, we'll send you home with castor oil. And if you end up needing it, we will call you, depending on whether it's amniotic fluid or not, based on our tests. And if not, we will call you anyway, and we'll tell you not to take it. So just hold on to that castor oil, and we will see." So I went home, put the kiddo down for a nap, took a nap myself. I woke up and they called me and they're like, yeah, it wasn't amniotic fluid, so you don't need to take castor oil or anything to start this up. And I was like, okay, whatever. I was having contractions at that point. They weren't super regular. Let's see. Yeah, at 5:30, I started timing the contractions because they started getting a little bit sharper, and they were averaging about 5 minutes apart, but they were really inconsistent. So I had a few that were like 10 minutes apart, and then some that were like 3 minutes apart, and then back to 5 minutes. So 5 minutes was the average, but it wasn't really consistent at all. But we kind of figured, well, we're probably going to have baby tonight. So I kept in touch with the midwives about that. We dropped my son off with friends. Which, by the way, the timing of this was terrible because we live in Albuquerque. Our family lives here. We were like, oh yeah, our family will watch our son. They were all gone on spring break. Had the baby waited like 2 more days, Alvin, my son, could have stayed with his grandparents, and instead we had to find a friend, and it all worked out. And it was like, okay, you couldn't have come a little bit later. But yeah, so we dropped Alvin off with friends. My contractions were about 7 minutes apart, 45 seconds long. They were starting to get consistent and stronger. And we were just kind of like, okay, we'll just labor at home for a little bit. We came home, we had dinner, I had a little snack, took a bath. I was like, I'm probably going to try to sleep because I know that doing this sleep deprived is really hard. I did that with my first, and it was, so hard. So I'm like, I'm going to try and sleep. I laid down and I couldn't sleep because the contractions were too strong. So I'm like, I think that's a sign that we need to call the midwife. So we did. We called the midwife at probably around midnight. They were getting closer together at that point too. So they were about 4 minutes and 37 seconds apart, about 35 seconds long. I remember with my contractions never really got shorter than 5 minutes. So to me, that was a sign of, okay, that means that we need to probably start moving, because I know there's the whole 4 minutes apart, 1 minute long rule, but that wasn't the case for me with my first. Anyway, so we called the midwife. They said, okay, you can come on in here. We took our time getting out to the car. I was having contractions still pretty consistently. I know for a lot of women, the car is not the favorite part, but for me, that was actually my favorite part because it was super chill. We have heated seats in our car, so that was a huge thing. I could just sit in the heated seats, and it was really nice. I was still getting contractions the whole time, and it kind of was pretty awful not to be able to get up and walk around. But we were like listening to my husband's study playlist that had like nice piano music, and we were just kind of chatting in between contractions. So it wasn't really that intense of labor yet, but we were on our way. The contractions, when they did come, were still pretty intense. So, we got all the way there. It was probably about 30 minutes, a lot faster than it was during the day because there was no traffic. Somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., I think, was when we arrived there. They admitted me immediately. They were like, oh yeah, you're in labor. Like, we can tell from the sounds that you're making. It's not active labor, it might be active labor, but it's not like transition yet. So, you're okay because you can still talk in between them, but we're going to, check you out. So they brought me right in there. They had a tub ready. They checked me. I was at 5 centimeters at that point, but my cervix was kind of oblong. It wasn't, perfectly round yet. It was kind of more oval shaped, and baby was at -2. So they were like, okay, you have some time. So, just do what you need to do. Just labor. You can get in the tub if you want. So I did get in the tub, and they kind of just left us. They made sure that we had everything we need, and then they just left. And we were like, oh, okay. I guess we don't need anyone else. So we just worked through the contractions, and that was really great. I loved it, that we were just alone, just had some candlelight. My husband turned on his music, and it was really nice and relaxing and soothing. So we did a few hours of labor that way. I was in the tub for most of the time. I did get out to use the bathroom a few times, but it never really got super intense. And it kind of came to a lull. I was still getting contractions, but I was handling them okay on my own. So Braden, my husband, was like, can I just go take a little nap? Because I know this will get more intense. And I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead. They had a little bed in there just for the dags. So he went and curled up to take a nap. And about 15 minutes later, I'm like, you need to wake up. I'm going to throw up. Come over here right now. And that was like right when the midwife comes in. So I'm like throwing up. I feel this gush of fluids coming out into the tub. The color of the water doesn't change, which is a good sign. There's no green. So yeah, the midwife was like, do you want me to check you now, that you're starting to feel a lot worse and it's getting more intense? And I'm like, sure. So got out of the tub. She checked me. I was at 8 to 9 centimeters, but the cervix was still oblong and baby was still up high up. So we were like, what does this mean? Like, come on, baby, come down. Like, we need to, get you down. So they were like, okay, maybe you need to move around a little bit. I did get back into the tub, but, after trying to push for a little bit and that went nowhere, like trying to get the baby down, labor stalled again. And we were like, okay, well, I guess we get a little break. So Brayden went and took another nap. I just kind of worked on my own for about an hour. I did get out of the tub at that point. So I was kind of pacing back and forth in the room and bouncing on the ball. I have no idea how he slept through that because I was still making a lot of noise. But yeah, he slept through it. After about an hour, I started to feel really lonely. So I woke him up. And it was right then that I started to throw up again and contractions started to kick up a notch. And I was having a hard time talking in between contractions. So you're like, okay, maybe this is the real deal. So the nurses got me back into the tub. It was, getting really intense. So I was like, okay, they have these options for pain management. And one of them is nitrous oxide. So I thought I'd ask for that. So they brought in the big tank and the mask and everything for nitrous oxide. And I tried it out and I hated it. I just hated it. I didn't like the smell of the plastic. I was like, this is not going to work for me. We're just going to go without the nitrous oxide here. So they took it away after a little bit. And then I asked for fentanyl because I was really tired. And I was like, maybe I just need a nap and that'll help. And they were like, no, baby is too close at this point. So you just need to keep going all the way through. And I was like, okay, that is encouraging to hear that I'm too close for fentanyl to even kick in before I can get a nap before the baby comes. At that point, the tub wasn't really working for me anymore. I was, feeling like I had to be getting up and like squatting down or something. So I got out of the tub and I sat down on the toilet and I asked them to check me again. And they said I was 9 centimeters and finally the cervix was round and baby was like engaged in the right position. They're like, oh, good. You were almost there. Like we could tell already, but you're almost there. You got this. So, I was, starting to push a little bit, not really that intensely yet. And the midwife said, there's this little lip of cervix, that we can't seem to get out of the way. Like your body is really trying. Do you want me to reach up in there and kind of nudge it out of the way during your next contraction? And I said, sure, let's do that. I just want her out of here. Like this has gone on for long enough. I'm tired. So she did. During the next contraction, she reached up and she moved that lip out of the way. And that's when things really started to get super intense. I know I've said that before, but this was like when it really was kicking into gear and I couldn't even talk between contractions. And I was like, okay, this is it. So they were like, okay, so you're on the toilet right now. It would probably be easier if you were on all fours. And I agreed with them. I felt like that was the position I needed to be in. So I kind of collapsed onto the floor and they were like, do you want to go to the bed? And I was like, I can't move. So like in between contractions, I would kind of like inch forward a little bit on my hands and knees and I would stop for another contraction and I would inch forward again. And they were like, you're getting really close. So I made it all the way to the bed and I couldn't get on the bed. And I was like, we're just going to do it here on the floor. This is fine. So I kind of collapsed on the floor and I felt my water break again. So I actually had my water break 2 times with both kids. The first time they were like, we can feel your water is still intact, but you probably did have your water break and baby just moved in the way. And that happened both times. And then with the second water break it was green. And they could tell that there was meconium in there. So they were like, okay, we're getting a little bit worried about the baby, but you're okay. Just keep pushing. You are almost there. So I felt that ring of fire right after the water broke. I was like, oh my gosh, I am stretching so far. Like this is way more than I thought it would be. I was on an epidural at that point. So I had never felt that before. So I was like, whoa, this is crazy. I am stretching so far and the baby is like coming out. I can feel her coming out. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like all that whole time I've been saying like, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. And at that point I'm like, no, I can't do this. This is crazy. Braden and the nurses and the midwife were all like, no, you're doing it. You're doing it. And, my favorite phrase that I remember really distinctly was the nurse, she came right up to me in my face and she said, you are doing it. That's what your contractions are doing. You're pushing the baby out right now. And the midwife started giving me updates as I was pushing the baby out. She started giving me she said crowning. And then after another push, she said the eyes are out. And then another push, the head is out. And I couldn't feel anything. So I reached down there and I could feel the baby's head. She said, that's your baby you're feeling. I'm like, oh, okay. So I kept pushing and finally the baby came out and it was, just the most amazing, relieving feeling. I like to compare it to hiking a mountain. I grew up in Colorado. So, I climbed up a 14er one time. That's a mountain that's higher than 14,000 feet. And just that sense of accomplishment, was just, it's like, I'm on top of a mountain. I did it. And it was kind of that same feeling with birthing the baby. Like, that was so hard. I did it. That was so great. I'm glad it's over, but I did it. So yeah, she was born then. It was a little bit scary because she wasn't immediately responsive. So they helped me kind of turn over, and sit down. And they put her on my chest and they were like doing all these things to help her. And she was kind of like, she had her eyes open and she was looking around, but she wasn't screaming or anything. And they're like, well, she has a strong heartbeat, but we need her to make a sound so we can kind of assess her lungs, especially since there was meconium in the fluid. So they checked her APGAR and after a few minutes, she was good. I did request delayed cord clamping and they were able to delay it for 2 minutes before they had to move her to a harder surface to keep working on her. And, finally her color got a lot better and she was all right. So that worked out okay. But yeah, she was born at 7:49 a.m. We got the golden hour. It did get a little bit rough after that, because she still had stuff in her lungs, but yeah, they came to check on this. She was, I got to latch her onto my breast and she latched pretty nicely. My husband got some time to hold her skin to skin during that golden hour and that was just perfect. So yeah.
Well, what a neat story. I love several things. I mean, I love the story, of course, but there were several things in there that really stood out to me. I love the comparison to the mountain. I've compared it to like running a marathon. Like the first time I did a half marathon, I remember coming back and I did like a whole live about it because I was like, this is as close as I could get to the intensity and the strength and the stamina that you need to get through it. So I love the visual of that. And for other people who have hiked or whatever, I think that'll be really great. The other thing I think about that too is you make it to the top of the mountain and it's not over, right? Maybe postpartum or the next couple, like you still have to climb down that thing. So that's kind of the next wave into now I'm a mom and we were going to be bleeding for 6 weeks. And, there's the whole postpartum that we go into. The other thing that you talked about, though, was the fact that your body gave you some stalls and it's totally normal. And because of the setting that you were in, no one was freaked out about it. It's like, oh, shoot, her body has stopped. We have to do something to keep it going. It was no, cool, we get a break. Now I can rest before the next wave of what's coming. And I think it's so important for women to hear that because it is normal. That is absolutely a normal thing for your body to hit what we call stalls or breaks or pauses that allow us to regroup and regather. It's the same for the baby. Maybe the baby needs a break and everybody's just kind of like, okay, let's take a breather and then come back to it. And then your body went right back to it and you did it. You did all the things. And the same with you talking about, I was comfortable in this position or, you're trying to make it to the bed, but you're like, this is where we land. And everybody being ready to just support you where you're at. This is the difference between physiological birth and the way that we manage it today. So there are so many things, Rebekah, that are beautiful about your birth story that are going to serve so many women just from hearing it. So I hope you keep telling it. I'm so glad that you got to do this here, but I hope you keep telling it as well. I feel like I could go back and there's a bunch of things. One thing I do want, I kind of mentioned this before we jumped on, one thing I want to ask you, because you said when the contractions started, they were almost 8 minutes apart or a little over 7, something like that. I would love to hear, like, bring us visually with you what it was like to be in that birth space. Were you rocking and swaying? What was your mind doing? What were you thinking? Were you kind of like, is this the real thing? Tell us what it was like to work through those contractions, and if you remember what they felt like, if you can describe that as well, and then take us through as the contractions became more intense, what that was like.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, I know with my first, because I had pregermal labor, I wasn't sure when it started, and it was a little bit similar with my second. I wasn't sure that it was starting, but I was like, it feels a little more real than it did these past few contractions over these past few weeks. And I remembered how it felt with my first, how the contractions, it was hard to talk through them. And I had to focus a lot more on breathing and on being still, and, or, on moving or whatever I had to do. And so that's how I knew that I was going into labor with my second, at least, was based on previous experience. I don't know if I ever reached that 4 minute, 411 thing for my contractions, but I do know that there came a point when you did mention rocking and swaying. I did have to do that. I did do a lot of rocking back and forth and swaying in place. And sometimes I got on my hands and knees to kind of, move around that way. And my husband was able to give me some pressure on my hips to help out with that. But yeah, I wasn't able to really sit still for most of them, which, made the car ride a little bit hard. But yeah, that's how I knew that I was in labor. And then as they got more intense, in the tub, I still didn't feel like I could sit still. Like when we got to the birth center and they put me in the tub, I was still moving in the tub. It was a really big, like huge size of my, dining room table tub. I got into different positions in there. I got into squatting positions. Sometimes I would turn around and like put my arms up on the side, and kind of lean against that, or I would like kind of, move around in the tub. So there was a lot of space to move around in there. And as I mentioned before, there was a point when I did get out and I used the ball and I kind of paced around the room when I was having contractions as well. So,
thank you for sharing that. Okay, I want to ask you real quick before we jump into your best advice for moms and best advice for dads. I know that you're a My Essential Birth Course mama, so I want to ask you a little bit about the birth course and kind of just tell me about it. What did you love about it? What did you feel like it helped you with or help you overcome? How did it prepare your birth partner? What were those things that were so useful that you really enjoyed taking through to your birthplace with you?
yeah, of course. So like I've said before, I feel like knowledge is power, especially in the birth space. And I immediately, as soon as I found out I was pregnant with my first, I went looking for something that could help me to gain more knowledge, not just about the process of birth in a hospital, but also about how birth really works. And the My Essential Birth course, I think, really helped me with that. It gave me a lot of different perspectives of options that I could do. So with my first, I did have an epidural and I knew what to expect with the epidural. With my second, I knew about the different techniques for moving around, for pain management. I knew about the birth tub and about the benefits of water birth. And I just felt like it just helped me to get really informed. Like, of course, there's also the whole practice aspect of it, the meditation, the labor rehearsal, all of that. And that was helpful too. But I just felt like for me, the most important part was how much I learned about birth from someone who is, unbiased and like, you can do birth however you feel like it. Cause most people I talk to are like, yeah, if you go into labor, you have to go to the hospital and then you're going to get an epidural at some point and maybe a C-section. And I didn't want that, and yeah, it just really helped to have all that information right up front and all the different options that I had. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I love to end these with your best advice for mom, best advice for dads. And since you've had 2 births, I feel like now we get double the goodness of these things, right? Because we've got all the
Yeah.
more experience. So go ahead and tell me your best advice.
Yeah. So, my best advice for moms is don't be afraid to take the leap and do a birth center. I know that, in this world where most people labor and birth in the hospitals, it can be a little bit scary to think, well, what if something happens to me or to my baby? And actually, in my case, my daughter did need a hospital transfer shortly after she was born because of the stuff in her lungs. But throughout the whole process, the midwives at the birth center were so competent. They were so on top of everything, They were so careful. They knew exactly what to look for. Everything worked out just fine. And I'm so grateful that I chose to do a birth center, despite all of the fears of what if something happens? Well, they're prepared for that. They're prepared for every eventuality. They're prepared for anything that could happen. They know how to take care of you and your baby. I mean, they do it for a living. That's all they do most days is preparing women for delivery and catching babies and stuff. So, yeah, don't be afraid to make that leap. Do all you can to prepare mentally as well. Knowledge is power. Do everything you can to learn and prepare, but also just don't be afraid because it will all work out.
I love that. And then how about for dads?
Yeah, for dads, my best advice would be present during labor and before labor if you can. Work alongside your wife with learning all the things. It really helps if the partner knows what to expect as well. That certainly helped in our case that my husband knew what to expect. He knew my preferences. He was able to advocate for me. So if you're a labor partner, make sure that you are doing what you need to do to be there for your partner while she is in labor, because it is so important that she has that support that she needs.
Thank you so much, Rebekah, for being here today and sharing your birth story.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.